I'm Autumn Lockett,
And this is Mitch Randall.
and you're listening to Good Faith Weekly.
Welcome to Good Faith Weekly, and on this episode, I am not in studio. In fact, I'm in the Northeast. My wife and I decided to pop up to New York City to catch a couple of Broadway shows for some time away. So you know what that means? Autumn is in charge of the show this week. So just like you, I cannot wait to hear the final outcome. We'll see you next week. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. We are so excited that you joined us today. The pod's going to sound a little different because Mitch is traveling, but you'll want to stay tuned. I have Alyssa Aldape here with me this morning, and then later in the show, Mitch and I will talk with Tony Peck and Alan Donaldson of the European Baptist Federation. You won't want to miss it.
Hey, Autumn, guess what time of year it is?
Halloween.
No.
Thanksgiving?
No.
It's too early for Christmas. People keep telling me.
It is a little too early for Christmas. No, it's the time of year when nonprofits ask for money.
You know, Mitch, I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, it is an exciting time of year because even here at Good Faith Media, we need to, from time to time, ask our listeners and readers to help support this great effort of keeping this message alive.
Yeah, the voices of inclusive people of faith are tragically underrepresented,
Yep.
leaving many feeling alone. And then we layered in this global pandemic,
Yep.
which pushed all of us further into isolation. But Good Faith Media provides a space for our voices to unite and impact the world for good.
And our daily news and opinion pieces provide thoughtful reflection from spiritual and thoughtful leaders around the world.
Our Nurturing Faith Journal is a print magazine that circulates 6 times a year to churches and households nationwide, delivering thoughtful analysis, inspiring features, and Jesus-focused Bible study curriculum.
And if you like this podcast, Good Faith Weekly, make certain to subscribe to more exciting and challenging podcasts brought to you by the Good Faith Media Podcast Network. Gather around your device as GFM continues advocating for inclusion for all, justice for all, and freedom for all. You can find more information about this at goodfaithmedia.org/donate.
Well, hello, everyone. I am here with Alyssa Aldape, and she is a contributing correspondent with Good Faith Media, and we are so happy to have you here, Alyssa.
Thanks. Happy to be here. I was going to try to do like my best Mitch Randall impersonation.
Oh, I'm here for that. Yeah,
But it's kind of like smooth jazzy, you know, because he's like,
absolutely. Keeping it on the ones and the twos.
yeah, like, hey, Mitch Randall with Good Faith. I can't do it. It takes too much practice. But I was like, no, don't try to do it on the spot. And here we are. I did it.
That's amazing. Well, you're missing like the glasses and the little hat and the cigar and all those kind of fun things.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you're here. It's always hard to talk about the news and headlines when you're just one person because it's a lot. And I'm glad to have your shoulders here to sort of bear that with me. Tell our listeners a little bit more about you.
Sure, happy to. So my name's Alyssa Aldape. I currently reside in Washington, D.C. Been here for about 5 years now, November. Born in Texas, raised sort of in Texas, and then raised overseas as well. My parents were missionaries in India for 14 years, and I was there for 5 of them. After that, went to school in Birmingham, Alabama, because as a good Texas missionary kid, everyone thought what you were supposed to do was go to Baylor. And so I thought I was being rebellious and went to Samford, which is like Baylor light.
Baylor with more humidity, basically, is what you found yourself.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, I'm going to be rebellious and go to Birmingham, Alabama. And then spent 6 years in Birmingham trying to, finish school and then figure out what I wanted to do. And then ended up in Atlanta, going to seminary there at McAfee School of Theology, and spent 4 years in Atlanta, North Georgia area seminary, post-seminary. And so really got that Southern training between the years 2006 to 2016. but yeah, so that's kind of, I guess that just mostly just named my like academic who I am.
Yeah.
Um, but aside from that, I love to hike and I love to people watch outdoors at coffee shops. And it just killed me that I couldn't do that during the pandemic. And so now that things are kind of opening up again, I'm not going to say back to normal. It's been really fun getting to observe people and remembering how we like peopled outside of
Yeah.
our apartments. And part of that in an odd way has been a really helpful practice for being a writer for Good Faith Media and getting to
Mhm.
write about kind of the cross point between faith, politics, and everyday life. So yeah, that's a little bit of me.
I love
Yeah,
so remind me, what age did you move from Texas to India?
I was 13.
Oh,
Um,
wow. That's
yeah,
like
and
peak Judy Blume, like, you were soaking it in.
yes, and so for some people, they were always people have been like, yeah, oh my God, like what that must have been so hard to leave in the middle of middle school or like, right before, all of those important years. And like if anybody remembered middle school, like when my parents were like, I know this might be hard, I was like, are you kidding me? I can just start over. Let's
Yeah.
get the hell out of here.
Yeah,
and
and no one will remember and remind me of the things that I'm ready to, like, move on from.
like I'm not going to be Alyssa Pissa anymore. Like I'm going to
Oh,
be a
yeah.
whole new person. And so yeah, I moved to India in January of 2001. That was no 2002. So a few months after September 11th.
Wow.
And really, like I mentioned before, we got there and um kind of experiencing a world post 9/11 from the other side of the world, I think was really eye opening for a kid who grew up Hispanic Baptist in Texas,
Mm,
just
mhm.
kind of steeped in Christian slash Baptist culture. Um, yeah, it was
S
very eye
so
opening.
so what was that like? And were y'all watching the news as a family? Were y'all discussing kind of what did that look like?
Yeah, so I think we got there when we arrived to India. I think there were the response to us when people would like, oh, you're American, and people were like, we're so sorry that happened, and like, oh, thank you, I appreciate that. That was not a great time. And also having to hold intention with that there were other places in the world who experienced that kind of violence, and they not that they move on, but um you know th- it doesn't they don't create songs saying we're going to come at you with airstrikes brought to you by the red, white, and blue, or like the
Right.
green, white, and orange, like they like it doesn't define their culture, and it doesn't become part of society or like part of the culture.
Mhm.
And so it was very interesting experiencing that terrorist attack from from this perspective, from a Western perspective in the States, and then going to another country and hearing the empathy and also the resilience of understanding,
Yeah.
like, this is this happens, but it shouldn't have to define you as a person or your nationality.
Mhm.
And yeah, really noticing the nationalism in America
Yeah.
post that, just kind of like really understanding the word nationalism um, was a big piece of processing all of that in another country.
That is so interesting because, I think I'm older than you, so I was a freshman in college. I had moved out, had been alone for 2 weeks when 9/11
Oh
happened,
my
woke up
God.
and was like, "I'm sorry, what's going on?" And so it was a very pivotal moment for me too.
Yeah.
But I think as, my background is in child development, and you think about that frontal lobe that's sort of coming together and starting to be
Yeah.
able to make, executive functioning decisions that are good not just for you, but for others. Um,
Mhm.
and you and I, even though you're younger than me, like, we don't really remember, like, a worldview before 9/11,
Yeah. Oh
you
my
know?
God.
And it's interesting to hear you say that because, we talk a lot at Good Faith Media. We write about, we webinar about um, Christian nationalism and white Christian nationalism. So, do you think that it was exacerbated by 9/11? I've never really thought about that.
Oh, 100%, I think so. I
Hmm.
mean, and I think so. I think before that happened, and I've spoken about this before. How my family, my family immigrated here from Mexico when my mother was in her early teens, and they talk about this great conversion for when they came here. They were Catholic, and that there was this Baptist pastor who evangelized to them, and they became Baptist, and therefore left everything behind, almost as
Mm.
if to be a Protestant, to be a Baptist, to be a good Christian was to be American, and to strive to be all of those things was to strive to be white, or this proximity to the whiteness. Um, and so while it was never, we never, even though it wasn't part of like a Nicene creed that we said on Sunday mornings of like we strive to be as best as we can, even though we're not white, we're going to try to be it. Like it
Sure.
was still kind of in the undertones of um in the practice and in the proximity and the modeling of white church at some points. And so there was always this kind of um underlying itch to explore that, because again, I'm assuming we grew up the same kind of way in this evangelical church, which was always try to be good, always confess your sins, and if you didn't, you weren't going to get into heaven, and that's
Right.
exhausting to do.
Go to bed at
And
night and you're afraid. Like, "Oh gosh," like,
yeah,
I'm still kind of
it's like,
upset with my sister, like, "I'm gonna go to hell if I die tonight."
yeah, exactly. And so living under that while also trying to attain whiteness
Mm.
through your faith, I mean, that's just exhausting, because you're just never going to be that, right?
No.
And so, always kind of having that underlying, anxiety within your Christian faith, and
Yeah.
then getting to a place like September 11th. And you're right. I mean, there were so many of us who 11, 12, 13, and even younger, and our teachers and parents were like, there's been a terrorist attack, instead of shielding your eyes, we're going to make you watch it.
Mhm.
Which, I mean, that's not to blame them, nobody knew what to do. And
Right.
so you have this kind of, as a brown kid, you have this underlying like, I'm never going to attain this, therefore I'm not a good person of faith, therefore maybe God doesn't love me as much as God loves, the white children.
Mhm.
And then this other, September 11th happens, and it unites us, and we make it this American thing, and we say we're all American. And it's a very odd place to be when you're already starting to begin that critical thinking, um, and to throw in the country that your parents love so much because they sacrificed everything to get there, but then also having your own beef with the understanding of what it means to be an American, and a kid of a Christian faith in America.
Mhm.
It's a lot. So I really appreciated the let's get out of here and go somewhere else for a little while.
Yeah,
um
and so did your parents, they were so you're first gen
mhm.
American, and so it sounds like they may have some sort of differentiated experience than a traditional family who moves here and, assimilates in one way or another to survive and raise a family, but
Yeah.
then they took sort of, like Girl Interrupted, and then moved to India. So how did that impact you developmentally, like, in your faith?
So I think one, it was a big wake up call to remember that one, Christianity isn't inherently American.
Say
Um,
that. Yes, absolutely.
yeah, I
Yes.
mean, it was a big wake up call because, I mean, one, whether it was understanding how traditional church worked, and experiencing church in another culture that is, traditionally probably at some points more Pentecostal even.
Mhm.
Um, and I know we had that in the States, but I didn't grow up in that. And
Okay.
so like understand like, no, that's not how you worship God. And like, well, no, that's just not how I worship God, or like I was
Right.
told to worship God. Um, and so that really started to crack open, I mean, the clay jar, I guess, of just, my understanding, or the jar that I put God in, or the expression of God in. Um, and then even going so far as to, really start to see the holes in this faith that I was brought up in. Um, And and I'll even say today, like, my parents went as missionaries, and in my head, because growing up in GAs, right, you learn that GA, like,
Girls in action. Absolutely. I
yeah,
was one.
you learned that missionaries, like, in my head, I had this idea that missionaries were people who wore safari garb and sat around a campfire translating the King James version directly into a language and then saving everyone on the spot.
Mhm.
um and if
You're
that is,
welcome.
yeah, like, look what I did for you, I'm so great. And that wasn't what missions was for my parents, and it wasn't what it was for them to live a missional life. And I was thankful for that. And also, there was still that underlying hope that the people that they were around would, yes, they didn't, if they weren't there to solely convert people, but there was still this underlying, I'm doing this because this is my faith, and I would hope that you would have this faith. And so it was very interesting going back and after, like, during seminary, and it felt almost as if, like, a pardoning of my own sin and understanding of Indian culture and religion and faith, because I went in thinking so many different, like, just this very American Western view, which is so funny coming from a culture that was colonized just as much, like it was like my own traditions and faith and traditions were all colonized and just kind of erased at some points, and then going to a country as a brown person and then being like, this isn't how you're supposed to do it, like, come
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
And so I think going back during my seminary career, as I was deconstructing and realizing I don't know, I don't know crap about crap, and to think that I
TM, Alyssa
understood,
Aldape. TM,
like,
TM, TM.
like, it was important to to recognize, I think, that there's no country and no Christian faith has any right to put God or divinity in a box, in a jar,
Mhm.
and say we have figured it out, or claim a God for their own country and say this is what everyone else needs to
Or
understand.
country for their own God, right?
Yeah.
Which it seems a bit wag the dog-ish here in the US. Okay,
Mhm.
so it sounds like your deconstruction sort of started when you were in India, and then
Mhm.
and maybe it sort of, continued. You're mentioning that it was happening in seminary. I'm wondering what that looked like during your undergrad at Samford.
Oh my God. Yeah. So, like I said, I went to Sanford because I was being rebellious. Um, I think it's so funny. Um, so I went to Sanford in Birmingham, and like, so I myself knew I needed one, because I was homeschooled and I wasn't around big schools in my life, and so I knew I needed a smaller school because I would just get eaten up alive at Baylor just because it was so big. Um, and also just because just again that whirlwind of deconstructing in India, and needing to, I guess, in a way, for lack of a better term, reset and kind of
Mm,
go back and say, okay, I need to be in a Christian surrounding, just to help me kind of get back to this, like, well, what do I believe? And um hey, this is a Christian school, maybe they'll be, like, nice and understanding, and not that they weren't. But I think being a brown kid from South Texas and not really being around a lot of white people for a very long time, and then being in India with
yeah,
other brown kids,
right.
um, which is, it had its own sets of culture shock. Um, but being in Birmingham at a predominantly white institution, it really started to kind of poke holes again in an understanding the underlying racism in this faith
Mm,
that I had started to be notice when I was younger. Um, and it was very confusing to me because, really, like, this understanding of Christianity or being a good Christian person was either my parents, who were there to do mission work and that underlying colonialism of conversion. And so that was my biggest understanding of Christianity. And then coming to Sanford and, like, there was very clear at some points, very clear roles that good Christian girls and good
Mm.
Christian boys played. Um, and it's so funny because we're in a place that is academically rigorous, and
Right.
students are very smart, and I had classmates who were working on like growing cancer cells in the science labs,
Yeah.
and then in the same breath say something like, well, according to David Platt, women and men are created differently to complement each other, and one shouldn't, women shouldn't actually be head of the other. Like, you're growing cancer in a petri dish. How do you believe this? And that I think for me was the two things that I held in tension during my years there was that you could be really, really smart and also, and I guess that doesn't negate the other, but it was very difficult for me to separate the intellectual and the faith,
Yeah.
and people just kind of blindly accepting like, oh no, well, this is how I've always read and understood scripture, and I'm going to prescribe it to my role as a male or female, or like a woman or man, or a straight person, but then also be so brilliant
Mhm.
and really try to do some gymnastics around avoiding those bigger implications on my
Well,
faith.
it's really interesting and such a paradox that those students that you're describing, especially in the science world, right? That they would think science is big enough for me to push the edges of this, for me to
Mhm.
test it, for me to like move beyond what I knew before in high school and do some different things, but not so much with God. Like my God is still the God I learned on a felt board. And like that's good enough.
Yeah.
So why is
Oh,
science
oh,
and why
Lord
is
God.
God right?
I'm writing this down because maybe that's the name of a book. Felt board God. And if anybody steals that, mark it here.
TM right here. October 28th, 11:35 AM Central Standard Time.
Felt
You can
board
tell
God.
you can tell we're coupled up with lawyers in our houses, can't you?
I appreciate that. Yes, yes. Well, he's on the other room, so I can't. He can't trademark it here. So, but I'm glad you could trademark it here. Yeah. No, this understanding of God kind of only right. It can only go so far in a border, um, that you've confined God in. Um, Yeah, and so and especially, I was in college when Barack Obama was running for president, and even that was very telling
I
of,
bet.
again, the underlying racism found in American Christianity that is focused in the South. Again, because that is the Christianity that I mostly experienced. And it was so funny because before we had the I voted for Obama liberals, we had the, well, I don't see color, and I think it's not that he's a black man, it's just that he really wants too much change. And he but then the whole thing was like, but he's a Christian, like he goes to church, he claims the same faith that we do, but like,
Mhm.
no, it still didn't matter.
Right.
Um
His middle
and
name is Hussein, for crying out loud.
yeah. Oh yeah, I think
Do
someone
you
on
remember
campus
that?
wrote an article saying that he was like a closeted Muslim
Oh, that's
extremist.
all I heard. Yeah, in Central
Um,
Texas, absolutely.
and so it was, again, I think that was another movement of understanding, like, things weren't as they appeared to me in my understanding of American Christianity.
Mm.
And again, like the lip service of we are from all people in their calls to God, and yet, there was, one woman in university, or like two women in university ministry, and then the rest were men. And it was just, again, it was the lip service,
Mhm.
and that's not to say that was just, strict, like, only Sanford. I mean, I got to seminary and realized the same thing about my denomination.
Sure. Sure.
um but I think Sanford, was one of the bigger places that it really began to crack open my understanding of the faith that I grew up in, and the faith that taught me about God. And I want to say that because, I think oftentimes when we, for people who identify as progressive and we're changing, right? We're constantly evolving. Like, I want to be clear that I'm very thankful for that faith that brought me up, because
Yes.
without it, I wouldn't have certain passages memorized. I wouldn't know how to play with a felt board. I wouldn't know about girls in action, which, let me tell you, low key is how all women in churches have probably been radicalized, because we were like girls in action and knowing that we could
I have
change
two
the world.
words. I have two words for you.
Yeah.
Molly Marshall. Have you heard Molly talk about her GA experience?
I have not.
Oh, I'll send you the link. It's brilliant. She was like, first
Okay.
of all, they were gaslighting you, but yes, also you've been radicalized. Yes.
Yes. And I think that's the real power move we need to bring back, is the girls in action on Wednesday nights.
You know what, Alyssa? We're still in action.
We really are. We're girls in action right now.
We are. That is just really touching to me. It's a sorority within the church, and we were learning about how people were being Jesus in their world. And here we are.
Look at what it did to us today.
So yes, you can be thankful for the faith that raised you, and then keep on growing.
Keep on growing. Take these beauties for ashes, like the song says, I'll take this beauty for ashes. I don't remember the song. Wasn't that like a contemporary Christian song back in the day?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, it absolutely was. Okay, so it's so interesting that you're talking about Samford, because there was a lot of hullabaloo about Samford in my news feed yesterday. What in the world is going on?
Okay, so let me try to break it down. And there's several factors to this. So I believe the new president of Samford University, Beck Taylor, they were having a bunch of inauguration events. I don't know the actual schedule, but one of those things was going to include a lectureship with John Meacham, or historian John Meacham. Everyone kind of knows him from different, or if you know of John Meacham, he's written autobiographies about some pretty great people. He's a historian. He spoke at George Bush's funeral a couple of years ago. He wrote President Biden's acceptance speech. I mean, he doesn't seem like he's not really a controversial person. He's like, he's a well-known white historian who writes and is a great storyteller as well. And most recently, his most recent book is called His Truth is Marching On. It's a story of John Lewis, and it's brilliant. And I just finished reading it about 2 months ago, and it just made me love John Lewis even more. So he was invited to be a lecturer at these inaugural events. And when I guess somebody there are some students in the student body at Samford who caught wind that at some point John Meacham has spoken or has given money to a local Planned Parenthood chapter. And so some students started a petition, and I believe they got about a few hundred signatures to ask to withdraw the invitation to John Meacham. And then a couple of nights ago, I think it was Tuesday night, the Student Government Association held a town hall to discuss it. And I mean, it wasn't great. And so as a result, Dr. Taylor essentially withdrew the invitation to John Meacham to come to Samford. The apologies, I think there's a statement on Samford's website, I believe. And he says, now is not the time. We shouldn't, it's time for unity, not a time for divisiveness or something. So, we'll have him come back at a later time.
Okay, there's some deeper theological things that I know we're going to get into. I just want to say that as a Southern woman, just the manners of it all, to withdraw an invitation, there are pearl necklaces that need to be returned, because that's your Southern hospitality card right there. And it's been revoked. It's just such bad form.
Oh yeah. And because I've spoken to a couple of my former professors who were able to give some more insight. Again, this goes back to, this was a movement started through the student body. These were students who created this petition, who said that this man's association with Planned Parenthood does not reflect Christian values, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, when I've spoken about, Samford, it is a tough school. It is full of smart students while also full of young people, I think, who are at a crossroad, and I think fear the change that comes with
Mm.
expanding your mind. And the reason I think it hit me so hard when I heard this, that it was students involved, because I knew that that was my experience there. That was the experience of, how can you hold these two things and pretend that they're not, that to deny, to how can you deny one and hold the other
Yeah.
accountable and say, this is true, while also saying, but this isn't. um and so, it was disappointing. It wasn't surprising, it was disappointing. um and I think, so, and it's so funny, again, like I've said, John Meacham, he is not a divisive person. I mean, he's written for Democrats and Republicans, he's written for moderates, conservatives, progressives. And I find it ironic that the man who just wrote a book about a man from Alabama,
Mhm.
his invitation to speak at an Alabama school has been withdrawn. At some point, I get that the student body is, the power in direct action is important. Student action is important, and also faculty and staff are there to challenge them and
Mhm.
to help them grow and expand their
Mhm.
minds. And it very much felt like that did not happen.
Yeah. And
Um,
I think it can be, both of them can be true. We've talked quite a bit over the past year and a half or so with Emma Fraley, who's now one of our interns. But she was the head of Gamma Tau Alpha at Baylor, which was the LGBTQ student organization that was just trying to get um earn their spot as a student organization so they could get funding and be an official student org. And they still do not have. She's graduated, she's moved on, and she talked a lot about how, like, she loves Baylor and she chose Baylor for a reason, but that doesn't mean that she can't encourage them forward to keep moving, and that you can love a place and want it to be better at the same time. And it sounds
yeah.
like that's sort of how you feel about Samford.
I think that's a really good, and it's taken a very long time to get to that place. But
Yeah.
yeah, this was the place that had the most faith in me in my academic career, or beginning of it, and holding how hard it was, while also holding that this was the place that I loved. I discovered my love of research and of history, and it was the place where professors, who were the ones who challenged me to ask, who gets to say that, who gets to be who holds the power of narrative, who
Mm.
gets to tell the story. And you must always pay attention to who gets to tell the story, and ask why the story doesn't include other voices. And so I love Stanford for that, and I love it so much that I want it to be a place where young people are challenged to expand their minds,
Mhm.
and really, faculty and staff to be challenged as well. Um, and so, yeah, trying to hold both. And again, we talked about it earlier with, this small Baptist world that we live in. Of course, like you said, the Stanford stuff was, filling your feed with people's takes on it. It's such a small world, and uh, there were some people who were like, well, no, you don't want to stir up trouble. This was a good move. And, it just, again, that middle ground, this idea that finding a middle ground or unity doesn't mean growing pains, is a it's an exhausting narrative,
Yeah.
and there will never be change, and there will never be good progression if there isn't the growing pains, and if there
Yeah.
isn't, some push to change. And yeah, I think these things with Stanford, when these things happen, because this Baptist world is so small, and because, surprisingly, I know so many people who went there. um it reminds me again of this understanding of, like, cracking open this worldview that I've held, that says this is just how it is. And every so often it reminds me, like, yeah, these systems and these worldviews need to be disrupted and changed, because clearly it is excluding a group of people, or it is excluding someone or hurting someone.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
and you're exactly right. The Baptist world is small and that we all sort of know each other and that holds us more accountable. But it's growing and the tent is getting larger. And, I'm so thankful that, you and Starlette and Emma and Jamie have joined us both, as either as consultants or interns or as employees and all those kind of things because your voices are important in continuing this and we are the ones that are going to continue this faith. And so just really thank you for your time and for your wise words today, and just really thankful that you were here with us this morning.
Thank you, Autumn. I appreciate it. I was glad to be
Absolutely.
here with you today.
Yeah, we got to kick Mitch out of the studio more often. Okay, I'm going to kick it over to Mitch to introduce our guest for the second part of this podcast.
Thanks, Autumn. That was some really great stuff. What a great episode. Well, the greatness continues because Autumn and I previously sat down with the new General Secretary for the European Baptist Federation, Alan Donaldson, and his predecessor, Tony Peck. We talk about all things that are going over on in Europe right now among Baptists and the work that they are doing. It's a really interesting interview, so stay tuned.
I'm Reverend Starlette Thomas, a womanist in ministry and the host of the Raceless Gospel podcast from Good Faith Media. It's season 2, and we're still talking about that taboo trinity: race, religion, and politics. This season of the Raceless Gospel has 8 episodes, 8 podcast church services. The doors at this church are open, and we're going to talk about the sticks and stones we carry faithfully that break the skin and bones of Christ's body. And on each episode, we're joined by those who bring perspective and insight as to how we set these broken bones and perhaps make things right. The Raceless Gospel Podcast, 8 episodes. I'm your podcast pastor, Reverend Starlette Thomas. Join us as we discuss the church in North America's bodywork. Learn more at goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly, and on this episode we've got some very special guests with us all the way across the pond in Europe. We've got both the former General Secretary and current General Secretary of the European Baptist Federation. EBF is comprised of approximately 800,000 members in 59 member bodies in 52 countries, stretching from Portugal to the far reaches of Russia. They are working continuously to help strengthen the relationships of these countries, where as of now there is no formal union existing. Tony Peck recently retired as the General Secretary of EBF, and he resides in Bristol, England. Alan Donaldson is the newly elected General Secretary of EBF, and he lives in Glasgow, Scotland. Gentlemen, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Autumn. It's good to be here.
Well, Tony, let's begin with you since you recently retired. First of all, congratulations on your retirement.
Well, thank you. It's not quite happened yet, Mitch. We're having an overlap month.
Oh, good.
So, but I will officially be retiring at the end of this month of October.
Well, congratulations. I know you're looking forward to it. Well, over your tenure as General Secretary of EBF, let's just kind of hit some of the highlights. What are some of the memorable moments for you as General Secretary of the European Baptist Federation?
Well, thank you, Mitch. Yes, it's hard to believe that I actually managed to do it for 17 years. And you can look back and not see the changes that have happened. I think one of the highlights has been a real strengthening of fellowship between the member unions, and they're very diverse in Europe. I mean, Baptists are diverse anyway, but in the EBF, you've got every shade of Baptist you could think of, and maybe one or two you'd never thought of. So the sign of all this for me is the very high number that support our annual council when our leaders come together. We have 59 member bodies, 40 to 45 of them will be represented. And when I look out on that group, I think, where else in this region would that group come together and be able to sit down together with their differences and their diversity, but somehow find this central, I don't know what it is, the unity of the spirit and the bond of peace, perhaps. That's been a major strengthening, I think, during my time. I think the other thing that I would mention is that we have managed to develop some key areas. One would be our commitment to human rights, religious freedom. I think when I came, it was largely down to me, etc. But now, we've got a little team who have become quite skilled at drilling down into the issues, showing us where we can take up the issues in the United Nations and elsewhere, and obviously keying into what the Baptist World Alliance are doing. And that's been a real joy. And the third thing I'd mention is that for the last 6 years, we have really wanted to get stuck into the issues of migration in Europe. Now, it began with the Syrian refugees coming through the Balkan route and towards Germany. But it's got so much more than that. And so we've created a commission on migration now. We've just appointed a part-time staff worker to help us to continue to develop migration issues. We hear about Afghanistan and people coming out of there, Syria, moving across Europe, places like East Ukraine. There's all sorts of areas where we've really wanted to support as EBF and as churches, as unions, the issues of migration. So those would be some of the things anyway.
So, Tony, you mentioned in your first point was just the collaboration among Baptists, the diversity among Baptists within Europe. Here in the States, there is also diversity, but there's also separation among Baptists. We here in the States are really good at dividing ourselves and doing our own things within our own factions. Is that common in Europe as well? Because when I attended the EBF meeting a couple of years ago, I was witness to some really, I thought, uh, just incredible conversations. For example, between Russia and Ukraine. The meetings with Ukraine, Russia had recently moved into Crimea, but I saw Baptists from both Ukraine and Russia come together to work on a resolution talking about the crisis that was unfolding in Ukraine, and they did it in such a graceful and just a wonderful Christian spirit coming together. I don't think we would see that here in the States. So, tell me a little bit about how European Baptists are able to come together and address these important issues in a real meaningful way.
Yes, well, even in the EBF itself, we have this issue of separation that does come. We do have unions that split sometimes, and we're sad about that. We've had examples while I have been general secretary. We've got a couple of ongoing ones at the moment. But just to take your specific example, that meeting in Lviv, I think, was one of the first times that the Russian and Ukrainian leadership had come together. And I think this is one of the things the EBF can do, is to provide a platform for such things to happen much easier there than going to one another's countries. Now, actually, that was the culmination of a few years of us urging them to come together, doing what we could, not always succeeding, because the feelings ran very deep. And it's not just about the Crimea, it's also about Eastern Ukraine, about the Donetsk and Lugansk provinces, which are now occupied, and the position of the Baptists there. So you're right, it was a joy to see that. It helped that there had been a change of leadership in one of the unions, in the Russian Union. And suddenly things are possible. But it takes a lot of work. I think the work of reconciliation is hard work, actually. It doesn't just happen often, but it was lovely to see that. So we have tried to make the EBF a place where that can happen. We don't always succeed, but certainly it's something that we aspire to.
Well, it was great to see, and I appreciate being a part of it.
that reconciliation is hard work, but it's holy work,
Mm.
and that's a
Yes.
really special place that you all are holding.
Mhm.
Alan, congratulations on your election as General Secretary. What is your vision for EBF as we look forward into the future?
Well, thanks, Autumn. It's a real challenging but inspiring role they've given me, and a real challenging and inspiring person to follow. I mean, Tony has just done incredible work for 17 years. For 12 of them, I've been on the Council of the European Baptist Federation and been sitting watching him in awe as he names everybody in the council. Sometimes as many as 150, 160 people gathered in one room. And he just knows their names, he knows their situations, and does a fabulous job of making everyone feel welcome. So the big challenge is not to be overdaunted by my predecessor, because he's done such a great job of it. But as I look into the future, we're coming out of a period of pandemic in Europe. At least we hope we're coming out of it. We're certainly coming out of a phase of it. And there's a real challenge to help our churches and unions, associations across the region to grow in steadfastness. This is a time where we're going to be called to go again, and then to go again, and then to go again. We will have many false starts where we think things are getting back on their feet, and then they just die back down. And so a big part of my role, I believe, is going to be encouraging the leaders who encourage the local pastors to keep on going, to encourage the evangelists to keep on going, to encourage the church planters not to give up, because this is not an easy time to do church in Europe. It's particularly challenging. So really calling them to steadfastness and keeping fanning into flame, as Timothy was told by Paul. And I guess the other one is to keep that level of relationship and partnership going, and really developing an understanding of what partnership is. For many years, partnership can have been somebody coming alongside and saying, I'll be your partner and I'll tell you where to go and what to do and how to do it. And we really have been working hard on what partnership means as getting alongside and firstly listening and asking questions and saying, what resource would help you? What prayer would help you? How can we get alongside you so that we can best develop what you have already in the nation and make that long-term sustainable? So developing that sense of quality partnership is going to be a huge thing. And I think leadership development. I was a general secretary for best part of 10 years in Scotland, leading a small union of 162 churches, 250 ministers or chaplains out there. And the one thing that I discovered was once you become a general secretary, where do you get leadership development? You can go and do a master's course and become more academic, and I did that, and that was great, and it helped me in many ways. Or you can go on and do a PhD, and again continue down that same track. But one of the things I'd really be keen to look at is how we develop our general secretaries, how we develop the leaders of our mission partners, and how we put them in a peer-to-peer relationship that helps them to grow and develop and experience the full width of our EBF area. So that it's not just the Western Europeans working together or the Eastern Europeans working together, but it's those from Central Asia and the Middle East working with the West and the East and bringing groups of leaders together to grow them and develop them.
Well said. Well, there are a lot of issues that the European Baptists have been facing over the last several years. Your website, ebf.org, has some great information about all the work that's going on across Europe. But let's begin with the pandemic. All of us have been kind of muffling through the last 18 months. And so, first of all, we're hoping that everybody is healthy in your families, in EBF. But how has the pandemic affected EBF's work over the last 18 months?
Well, if I begin, and then Alan will
Yeah,
probably
sure.
have
Go ahead,
things
Tony.
to say. But I think that the downside has been the lack of face-to-face meeting, which we regard as really important for us. That's where we, if I can put it this way, growing grace together. And there's no substitute for that, even with the best of online meetings. However, the upside of it is that some of our churches and unions have now been almost forced, but have taken on thinking in creative ways about how can we use this situation? How can we use these opportunities? So I'll give you one example. The 3D Church in Estonia that won the evangelism prize of the BWA earlier this year. The first thing they did, there are many young people, they organized something called a hackathon. I had no idea what that was, but I understand is where in the IT world, people come together and intensively discuss the future and how they can solve some of the present problems. And out of that came a series of ministries that were possible during the pandemic, counseling ministries and things like that. So we have a number of good stories there where unions have really taken on the challenge. There are others that, have been a little bit left behind, and those are the ones we need to really, really care for. As Alan said, that there's going to be, we don't know how we're all going to emerge from this. As far as the EBF's concerned, we actually did, for the first time, divide our region into 5 parts, and we had regular meetings of leaders. Well, actually, we saw some leaders that we never see at our council. So those were very helpful times. It was just for people to share where they're at and to experience a level of fellowship. So it's been a mixed picture, but I want to emphasize this possibility of creativity as well that might carry us forward a bit into the future.
That's great. So, Alan, here in the States, one of the things that the church has been working on has been trying to combat misinformation about COVID-19 and the vaccine. Is that going on in Europe? Is the church having to stand up and basically advocate for people being healthy and responsible and getting the vaccine? Because we're blue in the face, so to speak, here in the States, trying to talk about this and advocate for it.
So that's going to depend where you are in the European Baptist Federation area. The UK has had a huge uplift of the vaccine, as has most of Western Europe. But it's not exclusive, and there's a younger generation that are a little more hesitant, maybe, than an older generation. Folks over 50 like myself were desperate to get it for the protection that it was giving, as we were watching friends and family die of the disease. So it was very straightforward decision for many of us. But there are other places where there is a little bit of hesitancy around. It hasn't been a big issue in Western Europe, but Tony might be better placed to answer how it's been elsewhere.
Yeah, I think in other parts of Europe, there has been a mixed picture. I have to say that some of the information that you're referring to that might be in the United States does find its way over through some agencies, into places like Eastern Europe. And I think that there have been some of the same objections that you would find in the States in some places. One of the things the EBF was able to do is we did have an online seminar on the vaccination issues. And I think that was quite helpful because we had 3 top specialists who were connected with EBF countries talking and sort of reassuring and answering some of the questions about what was in it and all those kind of things. I think education helps, but I think that there's some people who just got it into their heads that this is not a Christian thing to do.
Yeah, like I said, we've been advocating for it for 18 months now, just being responsible, wearing masks, social distancing. And then once the vaccine was rolled out, making certain that everybody got the jab, so to speak. But there's been a resistance to it here in the state. Misinformation is running wild, and it's a shame. I mean, we should be completely out of this by now, but we're still dealing with variants and still trying to encourage people to do the right things. So glad to hear things are going well in Europe.
Yes. Alan, we've hit on it a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about EBF's stance and support of people who are immigrating within Europe?
Yeah, we have politically right across our area a wide variety of views about migration and immigration, asylum seekers, refugees, and you have to be careful not to mix up those categories at times. Um, and politically, they're welcome. Politically, they're not welcome. And that has a knock on effect on the church's response. But we also have a history of being refugees and being migrants within the EBF. So the Balkan area of our area has had times where they were on the move while they were at war. And so they received welcome elsewhere, and therefore they want to be welcoming in their nations. So you will get a wide variety across the board, but we have developed a whole understanding of what is happening within Europe with migration. We've asked all of our unions what they're doing in the migration area, whether it be as a union collectively or whether it be one or two individual ministries in local churches that are addressing migration issues. And we have a growing picture of what's been happening, probably really quite a tight picture over the last 5 years. And we're going again and mapping once more what's been happening. And that's one of the projects that's underway just now. And we have a commission on migration, and Hela Leich heads that up for us at the present time with Will. And Will's come over from Virginia, and we were able to employ him there in Vienna. And he's working away at looking at what's happening. And Vienna would be one of the places where many quality migration ministries are happening, where people are being welcomed, where they're being cared for, where they're being helped to integrate, where they're getting legal support, as well as pastoral support, and where we're seeing churches growing as a result of the welcome of the outsider, the welcome of the person who is visiting or the person who is hoping to stay.
So part of this immigration issue that we're dealing here with the states, and I assume that it's part of the same issue there in Europe, is racial justice, and where predominantly white community here in the states looks to our southern border, we see people of Latin descent, also more recently Haitian descent, who are looking to make a better life for them and their families. How does EBF combat racial justice in such a melting pot of of a continent where there are so many nationalities, so many cultures that are living together and immigrating across borders? What do you find that work difficult? Do you find it that churches are receiving that work well? How do you deal with racial reconciliation and racial justice in Europe?
Shall I start, Alan? It's not an area that we've developed that much. I confess, and it's partly because we're not very diverse. Say in our EBF council. Now, it's perfectly true that if you go to London or Paris or any of the big capital cities in Western Europe, it is a melting pot. The issue with migration particularly has been more, and of course it has a racial element, but it also has a religious element. Mm-hmm. That the issue really has been, can Baptists sort of participate in the welcoming of people from another faith, usually Islam, coming into their country? And where Alan talked about the political situation, where politically that country is not being welcoming, sometimes the churches have gone along with that. Then we have to remind ourselves that Baptists believe in religious freedom for all, and from that freedom come other freedoms. So that's the way the question has been framed for us in many ways. However, there are issues of racial justice, particularly in Eastern Europe, which during communism were fairly, kind of monochrome communities. and there have been some issues where people from another part of the world have come to study or something, have experienced discrimination. But it's that interreligious element that I think that is more prominent for us at the moment.
Mm.
Yeah. So over the summer, Alan, there were a lot of floods that took place in Western Europe. I know EBF responded to the tragedy that took place there in some of those countries. So tell us a little bit about the work that EBF did in responding to the floods in Western Europe.
I'm going to pass on to Tony because I was in hibernation at that time, hiding from the floods because I live on a boat.
Oh,
And so when you live on a boat, flooding's a big concern.
uh,
So Tony will pick that one up for you.
okay, yeah, right.
Well, the main place where the floods happened actually was in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a couple of churches that were badly damaged, and of course communities where people lost their homes. Our support actually in the end was one more of prayer and support and encouragement to the German Union. They were quite well resourced. So actually they didn't need a lot of extra resources, but they did need to know that, we were supporting them in what was a tragedy really in certain parts of Germany. And so that's what we did. And I think that's what sometimes we can do well as EBF, is to come round a union and a situation and say, well, what can we do? It's not always about sending money. I mean, we had earthquakes in Croatia and we needed to send resources to help that. But in Germany, it was a question of assuring them that we were there and we were there to help. And we got the reports and, kept in touch with the German Baptist Union.
We appreciate all the work that EBF did for those churches and those people in Western Europe regarding the floods. Alan, you're beginning your tenure. One of the biggest issues on the global scene right now is climate change and how Christians, in particular Baptists, can respond to climate change as caretakers of God's creation. So tell us a little bit about kind of your vision for EBF and how to encourage Baptists in Europe to be more responsible when it comes to climate change.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Now you've landed on my home ground because, of course, COP26 is happening in Glasgow.
Yeah.
And the boat that I live on is on the Forth and Clyde Canal, about 6 miles from Glasgow. So I jog into Glasgow at least once a week and back. So this is my home patch where all this is happening, and it's really important for our churches to get on board with this. And at our recent EBF Council just a couple of weeks ago out in Amsterdam, we passed a new resolution together, a unanimous agreement on that resolution regarding COP26, calling our churches and unions and associations to really ramp up their activity in this area. I remember about 15 years ago, I arrived in a new church as a new pastor in that congregation. And I said, is there any festival seasons that I need to know to make sure are in the diary? And they went, well, we celebrate harvest because we're a rural community. And we celebrate Creation Sunday. And I went, Creation Sunday? What's Creation Sunday? And they said, oh, don't worry, just go speak to Barbara. So I went and spoke to Barbara. She works for an organization called Arosha. She's the international secretary of Arosha. And she basically looked at me in disgust, thinking that I knew nothing about Creation Sunday. But it was a day that had been set aside for the church to remember that they had been given a mandate in Scripture to care for creation. And that mandate had not been lifted. And that church had for many, many years been teaching a theology of the redemption of creation and our responsibility to look after the world in which we live in. I was playing catch up when I arrived there. They were creative. On the Saturday night, they put the moth trap out in the back garden. And on the Sunday, we had 30 different moths to look at in church as we arrived, so that we could see the variety and the beauty of God's creation that is normally hidden from us because we're asleep in our beds at night. And we need to get the churches all over the world to wake up to the fact that we have a mandate in Scripture to care for the world that we live in. we should be leading this. It's almost an indictment against the people of God that we are having to follow others who have been caring for creation for so much longer. So whether it's like the church in Glasgow, which gave up coffee cups that get disposed of and got the whole congregation to purchase their own reusable cup and bring it every single week for the coffee and tea at the end of the service, whether it's my wife's bamboo toothbrush with carbon bristles that's completely recyclable, whether it's the fact that I've moved onto a boat so that our carbon footprint reduces to almost nothing compared to the massive footprint it was when I lived in a 5-bedroom house with my wife on our own. And now we've asked all our unions to take that resolution away and say, what does it mean for you in your home? What does it mean for you in your church? How can you corporately work together to make that happen? And here in Glasgow, churches are doing all sorts of amazing things in the run-up to COP26. And they have creation care groups now meeting to give you ideas. I have my little wormery where all my food scraps go, so that all gets turned into compost and food for the vegetables that I grow on the side of the canal. And there's just so much creativity going on. And it's a time to look to the younger generation, because they're a generation that were on this years ago, and they've been waiting for their churches to catch up. And so I just keep looking to the young people around me, the kids around me, even some of the little children around me. And they are the ones who are able to teach us on this, how to move forward and how to learn more about loving this creation that is just so beautiful that God has given us.
Okay, you had me at wormery. I love, I love that concept. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Alan, for leading the way, being caretakers for God's creation. That is outstanding. Well, before we let you go, how can Baptists here in the States, Christians here in the States, how can they partner with EBF churches and EBF? In a productive way, because eventually this pandemic and is going to be lifted, restrictions are going to be lifted, we can start traveling again. How can Baptist here in the States work with Baptist in Europe?
Well, you got to watch that traveling again thing, because if you start traveling too much, you're going to have an issue with the last question, which was about creation care. So we really got to watch our traveling and look at how we're traveling.
There you go.
And ask the question, is the right thing to do to travel? Because we can do virtual mission trips now. We can take you straight into a church planning situation in Ukraine. And your whole church can be there and see it. And it's possible to support church planting in Ukraine. We've been running a mission partnership program now for 18 years. We're just about to cross the 250th church plant in that program. And these are all indigenous church planters, people who come from these nations. They already know the culture. They already speak the language. And with a little bit of funding, which mostly comes from Western Europe or from North America, something in the region of 6,000 euros. What's that in dollars these days? About the same. It's not far off. And we were able to plant a church for a year. And we support these church planters for 5 years until they're self-sufficient and on their way. So that's one great way. You can get in touch with our mission partnership program. And local churches can do it. Whole unions can do it together. We have many supporters already in the States who are doing that for us, and it's great. And we've got half a dozen church planters waiting for funding right now. So that's an easy one. We also have a crisis in Lebanon just now that I'm sure you're aware of. Sure. Lebanon as a nation has, to all intents and purposes, collapsed. Today we're hearing there's absolutely no fuel in the country whatsoever, which means there'll be no electricity in the country because they all rely on generators when the main grid goes off and stuff, which means there's going to be issues with purification of water, which means there's going to be issues with hunger. And folks aren't earning money, and inflation is rife, and the economy is collapsing. It's an absolutely horrendous situation right now. And so we've just launched an appeal to get support for the churches in Lebanon, the details of which are on our website, ebf.org. And so we're crying out for folks to partner in that area and put support into the hands of Baptists in Lebanon as they seek to not find a light at the end of the tunnel, as the local Lebanese people said, but to actually light lights in the tunnel. Because any light at the end of the tunnel is a long, long, long way away right now. So we're trying to help them put some lights on in the tunnel. And the same would also be true in eastern Ukraine. As winter approaches, the need for blankets and stoves and ceramic heaters is absolutely huge. So we put out a second appeal for that support as well. So there's some real practical stuff that's out there just now within our area. But Tony will have more.
Well, I just wanted to say a word about this word partnership, because over the years, of course, I've experienced many who want to be our partners. And if I can put it positively, the partners that we really appreciate are the ones who come right alongside us and say, what is your situation? How could we best support you? How can this be a mutual partnership? And from North America, there's been some excellent examples of that. For instance, Virginia Baptists have done a great job in different parts of Europe, not least the situation in Austria that Alan was mentioning earlier on. So we really like those kind of partners. And there are good examples of them from even outside Europe, and where they come and say, we're in with you for the long haul, then this is great.
Well, you can find out more about European Baptist work at ebf.org. Make certain you check them out and all the good things that they are doing over there. Tony, Alan, thank you so much for joining us at Good Faith Weekly. But before we let you go, Autumn's got one last question for you.
Yes, our tagline at Good Faith Media is there's more to tell. So in light of your mission at EBF and everything we've talked about today, what is your more to tell?
My more to tell, I think, would be the continuation of this process of learning to be an example of unity in diversity. And that's not easy. But, I feel that the EBF has been on a journey of this. And I think under Alan, it'll continue on the journey. And it is that learning to live with that other who is different from me, but whom I can find a deep unity as we recognize each other as Christian disciples.
And Alan, you got the last word.
I get the last word, and I want two. Two words are positive deviance. I think watch out for positive deviance. What is growing in the margins? What is happening on the edges that God is blessing and using? And start asking questions of those people. And I think that's a good word for the future.
I love that. Positive deviance. Thank you so much. Tony, Alan, appreciate you being with us this week on Good Faith Weekly. We are excited about our partnership with EBF and all the good work the Baptists are doing all across Europe. And so blessings to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Autumn. Thanks, Mitch.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Good Faith Weekly. And as always, until next time, keep living good faith.